Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is your host and galactic judge, Mark presiding, and I bid you a welcome to the Cinema Courtroom Show, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial with yours truly. Do not forget to click the like or follow button and subscribe on whatever, and I mean literally whatever, streaming platform that you just be happening to tune into, whether it be Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or for more exclusive video coverage and, bonus casts that you're not going to be getting anywhere else, the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, pigeon, whomever. We don't discriminate, except maybe if you're a pigeon. I don't know. It is honestly a huge honor and privilege to be back doing this again, which means that we're not going to waste any more time here, ladies and gentlemen, and get straight to reviewing Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. You know what? Let's waste a little bit more time, because I have to explain to you how we're going to be reviewing this particular movie. As is customary for reviews for newly released pictures, especially, massive, hype generating movies such as Ant-Man, I will be splitting up my review into two parts. The first part will be our non-spoiler discussion of the movie. So don't worry if you're going to be watching Ant-Man Quantumania later, because you could still tune in, and you should still listen to the Cinema Courtroom Show, because I think every consumer should have the right to know the product that they're about to consume. And then we're going to be talking about, in the second half of our discussion, Ant-Man Quantumania in open spoiler glory. Now, without further ado, let's get straight to reviewing Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
It's okay, breathe. We're gonna get out of this. And we're gonna go home.
This place, it isn't what you think. It's a cage. But we can help each other.
He's a monster. You cannot trust him.
I'm just a man. But I know how it ends.
I don't care what he can do. He's not getting out.
You thought you could win.
I don't have to win. We both just have to lose.
As much as the next diehard MCU fan and, general movie-going audience, I was very looking forward to watching Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Granted, I'm, not a hardcore MCU fan anymore, because I'm, pretty disappointed in the current state of the MCU. Phase 4, and as you'll soon learn, the beginning of Phase 5 with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. The trailer for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, with Elton John's Yellow Brick Road track was perfect. So, anyway, there comes Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, tra-la-la-la-la, with all of its visual spectacles and action-packed glory. This movie is not good. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania is, what I believe to be under the misguided impression that with the sufficient amount of corny and throwaway lines, visual noise that lacks substance, and I'm sorry, but I also think that there were indeed social elements, and you, those of you who've listened to me for some time know that I detest that. Anyway, there were social elements that were just shoehorned for nothing. No context, especially with the Cassie Lang character, who I always perceived to be charming in the first two Ant-Man installments, and even in Avengers Endgame. But anyway, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania seems to be under the impression that with all of these cheap tick-the-box elements, that it's going to somehow be an acceptable movie to the avid moviegoer. And it's a big shame, because not only do I think that the perception of the general moviegoer who just wants to watch a science fiction film about a quantum realm is important, but I also think that it's a big shame that it kind of broke the precedent that Avengers Endgame set in the level of hype that we're supposed to have for a big event movie, which Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was supposed to be, apparently. Another thing is that Avengers Endgame made me the most hyped for a third Ant-Man film. I'll always reminiscence that touching moment, exchanged between Scott Lang and Cassie in Avengers Endgame. When Scott Lang gets out of the quantum realm and revisits his old home. Unfortunately, though, and I honestly didn't want to believe the reviews when they pointed this specific element about Cassie Lang's portrayal out, but I think that Cassie Lang right now is the textbook definition of a Mary Sue brat. Kind of like Rey, not Skywalker, in the Star Wars sequels. Without giving much away about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Cassie Lang is basically a social justice warrior and gets involved in something nefarious in the beginning of this movie. The way that she handled the situation that she was in, the way that she handled it was not good, ladies and gentlemen. It was just bad. And it should have landed her in prison for the second time already, because I recall when that specific thing was revealed. In fact, she did the thing right in front of us, and right in front of the... Should I? Okay, I'm not gonna spoil it, but I'm just gonna say that she did it right in front of the police officers as she was getting released. And when she done that, I was like, what? And they just let her get away? What happened to the Sokovia Accords and shit? Honestly. I mean, I know that after the blip, the Sokovia Accords haven't been in much effect, but there's still a degree of, caution for, the kind of behavior that Cassie Lang exhibited with the Pym Tech. But whatever, I'll give it a pass because they needed Cassie Lang out of jail for this Oh wait, they actually didn't need Cassie Lang for this movie. She was practically useless. And can anyone tell me how in just a span of 2 minutes she masters the Ant-Man suit in the quantum realm? Like, the point is, making Cassie Lang a social activist and a character who has everything figured out already is utterly cringe. The whole point of watching a movie that is set in a fictional world where a regular sized human can shrink to the size of ants is to not have politics incorporated. If you want to convey a political theme explicitly, go ahead and do that when it's appropriate. Black Panther having social and political themes, no problemo. After all, the movie is literally titled after the Black Panther Party, which is indeed political and radical too. And hey, there's no problem with that because that's how Stan Lee always intended the inspiration for Black Panther. Cool. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, sure, it got a tad peachy at times, but it still works. But for the love of all that is good in this world, not an Ant-Man movie. Please keep, explicit political themes out of those movies. The only element that should be remotely political is how, former convicts have to navigate the society that they're released back into. And perhaps even a corrupt prison system. That's it. Other than that, social themes are, as I just already mentioned, cringe. And especially when it isn't even relevant to the plot of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania itself. So anyway, that was my main fundamental issue with the movie. I also didn't like MODOK at all. He was poorly designed. Granted, whenever he had his mask on, it looked much better on screen. But whenever he, took it off, it looked hideous as hell. The sad thing also is that, I saw a picture leak of MODOK on Twitter before I watched this movie. I thought nothing about it at first because I initially thought that it was a satire edit that an unprofessional artist conjured from their imagination. You cannot fathom my shock and disappointment that it was actually a still from Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania itself. The first act of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was somewhat intriguing, I suppose. Throughout the first and second, act of this movie, I kept contemplating to myself, oh wow, they're actually trying to make this a Star Wars movie. And I honestly, honest to God, I dig the concept of that. I love sci-fi movies that pay homage to Star Wars and other beloved science fiction stories. But the third act, ladies and gentlemen, sucked balls. I wanted to take a shower after having to endure certain scenes in this movie, especially in the third act. I will say that Kang the Conqueror in this movie was awesome. And it's not a spoiler to say that Kang shows up because that's pretty much, the movie's marketing tagline, that Kang is going to show up, as the conqueror of all timelines in the movie. And it's not really a spoiler to say that the threat of Kang isn't vanquished by the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, because they still need him to contest the Avengers, at least in Earth 616, because he actually executed the Avengers in other timelines before, as he was on his, multiversal genocidal rampage. Kind of like how Thanos is, except he only annihilates planets in one universe. Kang does that to multiple timelines. Before we get to spoilers for this movie, I also want to briefly touch on how I think that the post-credits scenes was superior than the whole Ant-Man Quantumania movie. Both of them, for a matter of fact. And both post-credits scenes also set up two essential MCU projects, one of which is Avengers Kang Dynasty. As if that, isn't obvious already. And the second Marvel project, which is Loki Season 2. With all of that, being considered, it is now time to converse about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania in much broader length with spoilers. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and then, and I'm about to say this just one more time in case I haven't made myself explicit enough in the opening of the segment, I will be jumping straight into our spoiler discourse after the break. So, if you haven't watched the movie and want to avoid spoilers, you are fully within your right to pause this episode, watch the movie in your spare time whenever you can, and then you can resume this podcast again. Otherwise, stick around for my spoilery thoughts about this picture. I will be back with my full review of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania after this break.
You're an interesting man. Scott Lang.
I don't know who you are, but you've made a big mistake, okay? I'm an Avenger. I've called the other Avengers.
You're an Avenger. Have I killed you before?
What?
They all blur together after a while. You're not the one with the hammer.
That's Thor. We get confused a lot. Similar body types. Who are you?
Just a man who's lost a lot of time, like you. But we can help each other with that.
So, here's the thing. I had 3 expectations going in for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, just as I do with almost every anticipated movie. The first expectation that I want to revisit is to build on the relationship with Scott and Cassie Lang. Why must we care, as the average moviegoer, about Scott and Cassie Lang's relationship more? What's missing from it? Or rather, what can be implemented in the screenplay to expand what we are already acquainted with? When it comes to Cassie and Scott's relationship from the first 2 Ant-Man installments, plus Avengers Endgame. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania opens with Cassie Lang getting bailed out of prison for getting involved in a protest for a reason that the writers don't bother to specify in this film. And Cassie's just carelessly using Pym-Tech to aid the protesters in whatever goal that they were attempting to achieve. Hank, Hope, Janet, Cassie, and Scott are sitting at the dinner table. Scott is concerned for his daughter's safety and well-being, obviously, as a father should be. And Cassie just lists the things that Scott did in the first Ant-Man movie that landed him in prison, neglecting the fact that she herself broke the law as well. This movie doesn't bother to illustrate Cassie Lang as a multidimensional and flawed individual. Instead, they just rather make her a Mary Sue character. And also, Scott Lang feels immense guilt because he missed out on 5 years of birthday parties after the blip, yada yada yada. I get why Ant-Man Quantumania was corny in that specific way. That I think I'll, excuse that corny element, even though I am not overly thrilled with corny pictures in general, especially for the vast majority of the time I sit down to watch a movie. I expect a level of seriousness. The way that, part of the narrative was executed for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, it wasn't good. While the concept for it was compelling, because it does address a riveting question. What happens if all of a sudden you disappear to a realm outside of time, and minutes, hours, years, all of those time merits are operating at a much more distinct pace, while, let's say, your daughter is living the next 5 years of her life without a father present in her life. What is going to be the result and inner turmoil of that? Unfortunately, we don't get a convincing answer to that question. All we get is one-liners and gags. So, in regards to my first expectation about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, while this expectation of building on the relationship of Scott and Cassie Lang has indeed been met to a degree, and there is a, somewhat of a layered perspective of Scott and Cassie's relationship, it doesn't change the fact that all of that has been executed in a bland fashion. My second expectation for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was to effectively set up Kang Dynasty. The key word here, ladies and gentlemen, is effectively. I don't expect him to just set up the Kang Dynasty movie and that's it. No. I expect him to do it in an effective way. Okay, because it's easy to bring a villain into one movie, like Loki or Thanos. Loki was in 4, then he was a villain for the Avengers. Thanos was, a villain in the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then they brought him over to Avengers Infinity War. Anyone can do that. But what made Loki and Thanos remarkable was that we were invested in their villain arc, and that effectively set up their, villainy for the next Avengers movie. So, here's what I want to happen. First, Kang has to convince me as this next bigger-than-life Avengers villain than Thanos the Mad Titan. And it has to be perfectly executed all the way through. And I'll get to whether or not that part of the expectation has been met. And 2, make us hyped to see both Ant-Man and Hope Van Dyne as the Wasp in the next Avengers installment. Because after all, it is an Ant-Man and the Wasp film. You must make it so that it possesses a Ant-Man and Captain America Civil War level of crossover hype. The first Ant-Man installment was pretty epic. Therefore, putting him in the trailer for Captain America Civil War got people hyped for the movie, which was of course a result of making us hyped from Ant-Man's very first introduction. Before I expand on that thought though, I just want to talk about how much I really enjoyed Jonathan Majors as Kang in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and this whole storyline surrounding Kang's villain and character arc, and how it was just brilliant all the way through. Unlike, other elements, most of which I'll be getting to later in this review, I've had no problems with Kang. And I also liked how Kang wanted to eliminate broken timelines and just restructure the multiverse so that it can be molded into a flawless structure. The fight between him and Scott Lang in the third act of the movie was also very brutal, just the way that I wanted it to be. They really made Kang a dark and menacing entity who is determined to do whatever it costs to achieve his goals, just like Thanos. In his efforts to eliminate overpopulation, Kang wants to eliminate broken timelines. The first post-credits scene with his other variants made me go, how are the Avengers going to be able to fight him? Because one Kang is already a handful, but heck, they didn't even kill this variant of Kang in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. So this is unsettling. Like, that's what I was thinking this whole time. And I really felt that they amped the stakes for the Marvel Cinematic Universe's 5th and 6th phase as a whole, which was just epic. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania overall effectively set up Kang Dynasty when it came to Jonathan Majors' Kang villain. However, and listen carefully, it did not make us hyped for Ant-Man's future in the MCU or the next Avengers installment at all. They made him too goofy and flat in this movie, and whenever they did manage to cover some emotional ground for his character arc, it was the same old "I'm doing it for Cassie" story on rinse and repeat. What I found to be the most corny scene is when there are like those different variants of Ant-Man and they all elevate him so that he can reach Cassie. 616 Ant-Man is like, why are you helping me? And then all of the other Ant-Men collectively respond, because we all want the same thing, implying that Cassie is the motivation for Ant-Man in every universe. And while, I found that to be a bit touching at first, I was like, oh my goodness, that is so freaking cheesy. My first and last expectation for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was to make a final conclusion, a solid conclusion to be precise, for the Ant-Man trilogy. Because even if we're going to make a fourth Ant-Man movie, I think that you need to first make the trilogy, where the first movie is the beginning, second movie is the middle, and the last movie is the end. And then you reset the whole thing in the fourth movie, and if you want to do a fifth and sixth movie, maybe with the exception of Harry Potter, where you need to build towards the big climax, and that takes multiple movies. But other than that, trilogies are meant to be focused on, a shared theme or, other elements that connect those three movies together. And I am just going to say that not only did Ant-Man and the Wasp not meet this particular expectation, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania just felt incomplete as a single movie. It didn't have Michael Pena as Luis, which just made the movie inconsistent. And I'm going to say this again. A trilogy must share a few elements between three movies, and it has to be consistent first and foremost, because Luis showed up in Ant-Man and the next Ant-Man movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp. having Luis do a post-Avengers Infinity War and Endgame breakdown would have been absolute comedic gold. But alas, they didn't do that, so I was pretty disappointed. Another thing is that Ant-Man and the Wasp's, primary focus on being a setup movie for the next Avengers film took away its chance of having a satisfying conclusion for Ant-Man, the Wasp, Cassie, Hank Pym, and Janet Van Dyne. They didn't even bother to follow up on Ghost and Bill Foster. Like, all of that stuff was ignored just so they can focus on all of the good scenes, about Kang the Conqueror. And that just, again, that was a massive letdown, to say the least. So anyway, those were my 3 expectations of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Just to recap. First, build on the relationship with Cassie and Scott Lang, which they only half did. Second, effectively set up the Kang dynasty. Again, they did a decent job with Kang the Conqueror. I have no gripes with how they handled his villain arc, and I think that setting him up as an intimidating Avengers level threat was the right thing to do. But they did not make us hyped to see Ant-Man in the next Avengers installment. And finally, there was no satisfying conclusion, if any conclusion at all, for the Ant-Man trilogy. I want to converse about a few more elements in regards to this Ant-Man movie before we wrap things up. The first thing is the visual effects. I actually think that the visual effects were spectacular and were an improvement from Phase 4's, overly rushed VFX designs. Like with She-Hulk. And we're not going to talk about that here. Listen, I honestly don't give a shit what other people have to say about the visual effects for Quantumania. All that matters to me is what I think. And I think that the visual effects for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania were indeed exceptional. The, computer-generated imagery for the Quantum Realm native creatures had this 3D-esque vibe about them, which I kind of enjoyed. Their uprising against Kang plot and stupid humor notwithstanding, they looked great, all things considered. Again, I did not like how they dealt with the Quantum Realm natives, and their motives were, one-dimensional. But the Quantum Realm as a designed set looked immersive. It looked like a world that was poles apart. For instance, the scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania where Janet, Hope, and Hank were riding this, dragon-like creature. It looked pretty awesome. But you know what wasn't great about this movie? The second thing that I want to talk about from this movie, it's the storyline. The storyline wasn't great. This whole revolution subplot where the Quantum Realm aliens or natives wanted to revolt against Kang, that whole thing was stupid. And the whole thing where Cassie gets MODOK to join the cause so he won't be a dick was cringe. Speaking of MODOK, I honestly don't mind. I don't mind one bit how they altered his original backstory from the comics and other mediums of storytelling that he was portrayed in. And made it so Darren Cross, the villain from the first Ant-Man movie, was MODOK. If anything, it actually makes total and complete sense within the context of the MCU, since we didn't see Darren Cross, as the Yellow Jacket, perish in the first installment. He just went subatomic, and nothing was heard about him until Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So, I got that. But what I didn't get was how 60% of the bad jokes in this movie came from MODOK. His death was undermined by, yet again, another stupid joke. The fact that MODOK proclaimed himself as an Avenger was dull. To this whole thing with the power core and how that was meant to summon a portal to exit the quantum realm didn't have enough context behind it. I also thought to myself, what happened to having a vehicle that could transport you in and out of the quantum realm? What happened to Luis's van? Why does there have to be some object that we haven't heard of before be the solution for more than half of the conflict in this movie? And I think that this film could have benefited from an extended runtime of 10 to 15 minutes or so. And another thing that I found to be questionable about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was how they made Scott Lang too oblivious, even for Scott Lang, who I get is supposed to be this, regular dude who finds himself in a very sticky situation, and he doesn't know shit. I get that, but the thing is, they made him very oblivious. And we don't even take into account the amount of evolution that he had experienced in Avengers Endgame, where Ant-Man witnessed firsthand the large stakes and how it is imperative for him to acknowledge that there is a colossal threat at hand. So to then have that undermined by him saying, this thing with Kang, it's probably nothing. We're out of the quantum realm, so we're out of the woods, is what dragged this movie down a long, long mile. The acting, I touched on this in my non-spoiler discussion, but let me utilize Michael Douglas as an example again. He's obviously not thrilled to be in this movie. For instance, there's this brief moment where Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym, after being separated for 30 years, got busy with their partners. Their other partners. And Hank turns to Janet and says, "None of them were like you, honey." Well, he didn't really talk in that accent, so forgive me for a very poor misrepresentation of Hank Pym. But there was a look of absolute betrayal of Michael Douglas' face. And I guarantee you that most of the actors in this movie were in different green screen rooms, and every single location was done in a green screen studio. No practical effects or authentic cinematography. No sets being built. Nothing. The cinema courtroom contends that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, while it is packed with plenty of juicy action and visuals, is a lousy opener of Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and reflects the deteriorating state that Marvel is in right now. And now we begin to approach the second half of the Cinema Courtroom Show, which is the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing? Well, I'm rather glad that you inquired about this, because to answer that question, in the first half of our show, we reviewed Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which is one of many films that I regularly select. Old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. Then, in the second half of the Cinema Courtroom Show, I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general, movie news and movie-relevant subject matters that aren't just limited to one particular movie, and I integrate all of that into one post-sentencing hearing list. Perceive it as an after-party that is long overdue, where you, yes you, the amazing listeners tuning in on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel for exclusive video coverage, are invited to this post-sentencing hearing. Sometimes, with the post-sentencing hearing show, like the organic sapien that I find myself to be, maybe I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. Who knows? So, the majority of the time, or all of the time really, I do alter my opinions after a rewatch or two of the content, which means I am compelled to review it again here in a post-sentencing hearing. For the most part. But sometimes we just talk about movie news. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of this podcast. If you enjoy what you've heard in the first half and what I'm about to say here on the post-sentencing hearing show, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate it from the bottom of my heart if you give this podcast a reshare, follow, and like this episode by just clicking the thumbs up or follow button or heart icon. Again, regardless of which platform that you might be listening on, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Amazon, or YouTube. This way, you will be supporting the Cinema Courtroom, as well as its future episodes, installments, and assets. In this hearing, we are going to cover the following: Netflix sanctioning a ban on exchanging passwords. And I'm also going to talk about why I disagree with such a sanction. We'll also be going over the list of Oscar nominations and some of my insights on them. And finally and foremost, I will be talking about the shocking box office results for Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. But before we get into all of that, let's spend a minute or less talking about the latest world news. The latest trailer of Drugs in the Machine features Mark Hamill fighting the Russian mafia. Andrew Tate gets detained for an extended period of time. Russia has been banned from the Olympics as a side effect of the Russia and Ukraine conflict. Marvel Studios on their social media page have unveiled the first poster for the Marvels after delaying it to November 2023. The Mandalorian Season 3 comes out after tomorrow, with weekly episodes on Disney Plus picking up where The Mandalorian Season 2 and The Book of Boba Fett left off.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Thank you for listening to News Minute. Now, let's get on with the rest of the Cinema Courtroom Show. moving forward for Netflix users and Netflix hitchhikers, as I would like to call them, Netflix, in an attempt to prevent password exchange, is going to ask anyone who is using a streaming compatible device to enter a 4-digit code, which would be transmitted to the primary address of the... I'm going to have a stroke just even saying it, all that, but to the primary address of the Netflix account holder, or whatever phone number is associated with your account. The thing is, though, the prospect of Netflix preventing password sharing doesn't sit well with, like, I don't know, let's say over 1 million people. At the same time, though, just as it is with pirating, password sharing doesn't seem to sit well with the morally righteous pricks that are living a privileged, cozy and snug life. But, ladies and gentlemen, like many things in life, it isn't all black and white. There is nuance in stories like these, discussions to be had, spears to be plunged, social media bombs to be triggered without a thought. A balanced discourse all around. Well, not really, because, elitism is a big thing, these days, but a discussion for another time. Now, you could probably hear the contempt in my voice when I said that password sharing doesn't resonate with, well, as I said before, morally righteous pricks. And that's my honest opinion. Because there's a misconception floating around out there that password sharing is just straight up theft and equivalent to pulling up to a DVD store and just stealing a disc. I mean, do you ever see those FBI ads that tried to criminalize pirating years ago? Instead of being more productive with their resources and laws and all that shit, and instead of going after people like Michael Vick, the FBI has spent a majority of their time creating advertisements for something that isn't even a real legitimate issue. It's barely a threat to, unless you're talking about small creators, it's not even a threat to large businesses in the industry. And the irony of all of this, when it comes down to Netflix password sharing, is that no one says that, whenever you borrow or purchase a DVD, or borrow or buy a book from the library, and then upon using the product and wanting to share it with the next person, whether it be your friend, in-law, family member, whomever, that it's somehow stealing. And that's because after you buy the product, you fulfilled your obligation of the contract, which is that the moment you buy that product, the product is yours, which means you can do one of two things. A, keep it to yourself, which is probably going to be less of a hassle than B, which is to exchange it with another individual. Now, whichever rocks your boat is perfectly valid, because the product isn't being stolen either way. If you keep the product and not share it, you're obviously not stealing it because you bought it. Or if you share it with another person, well, you have the right to do what you want with it because the money has already been paid in full by you. However, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I can recognize where people are going when they condemn the notion of sharing passwords to a degree. Now, keep in mind, I don't agree with this, but this is what people might try and argue. And I'm going to counteract it as well. Well, rather, Netflix is going to counteract the argument that I'm going to play devil's advocate for now. You'll see. Those people might look at my book analogy, because you know how I say, like, when you borrow or buy a book from the library, like, it's easy for you to lend or share to the next person. Now, someone might look at that and say, hold on a minute. Buying a book is a physical piece. Only one person can read or hold the copy at the time. And yes, it is true that Netflix has different subscriber terms, because while you do have the capability to exchange whatever you want, it does happen to breach the terms and conditions that Netflix have explicitly put into place. Okay, fine. And fair, if you think about it. But do you know what else Netflix has put into place? I would like to show you Exhibit B, revisiting March 10th, 2017. Netflix, in a tweet replying to themselves, mentioned 5 simple words. Love is sharing a password. Now, let me get this straight. If Netflix terms and conditions cared so much about password sharing that they prohibit it, then why the heck did they not only ignore password sharing in the past many years, but they actually encouraged it? Let me read it again. The tweet says, love is sharing a password. And listen, that is an objective statement. This tweet suggests that if you don't share a password, you're being a selfish wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever you identify as. On top of that, and listen very carefully, because Netflix users have been noticing this for a long while, Netflix and other streaming services have allowed for multiple logins. It is literally ingrained in their interface. So, just a follow-up question. Why is Netflix banning password sharing again? Like, I honestly want to know. And don't tell me it is because you're losing money. Because password sharing happens with HBO and Amazon Prime. They're not losing money because of that. The real reason I think that Netflix and other streaming services might not be able to consolidate enough money is because of a quality deficit in their content. It has nothing to do with, whether or not the terms and conditions have been breached, and certainly not to do with password sharing. No. It has more to do with their content and the quality control of said content. If you take a glance at Netflix's track record, they canceled popular shows and defunded an entire animations division. They have also made questionable creative decisions when it came to their storytelling and how they cast actors to play a role in those stories, which didn't have anything to do with the quality of their performance, but it had almost everything to do with the color of her skin, sexual orientation, or ethnicity. Instead of crafting good screenplays, They just created whatever was needed to fill the void of their diversity quotas for their television and movies. Make sure that whoever plays X role is a Jewish actor. Make sure that they're Arab, Black, Asian, white. Make sure they're all of those things first. And you know what? I kind of respect, the fact that they're looking at, the trends and how people are pushing for more diversity. And we're like, you know what? Let's focus on that first. Because it's good to analyze the trends and, follow up with it. Because that's how you make, that's how you make dough. But sooner or later, even the people who are so caught up in the trend of just, diversifying characters, they're bound to notice that pattern because it keeps happening. And it's pretty obvious that there is a quota happening. And before any hippies try and accuse me of opposing diversity, if me respecting it isn't, enough to debunk your claim that I'm opposing diversity, here's another thing to debunk that. The entirety of the third episode of The Last of Us on HBO focused 95% of its runtime on a gay couple. And you know what? It almost made me tear up watching that episode. And I think it had one of the best moments of television. That doesn't look like I opposed diversity in that episode. What I do oppose is bad quality content. And the chances of having a lack of quality in your television or movies is not focusing on quality, but just focusing on diversity first. And also, I liked The Last of Us episode 3, not just because the side characters happened to be gay, but because that particular episode emphasized the message of protecting the people you love in situations like a zombie apocalypse, and how fragile that life really is in those situations that are beyond one's control. And that's why I think overall Netflix is losing money, because one episode or movie, a character is straight. Okay, the character becomes popular, well, they're gay next season. And whether Netflix likes to believe it or not, this results in annoyed consumers who just want consistency in their programming and solid storytelling. Consumers aren't going to pay for a subscription to a service that annoys them, right? Inconsistency annoys people. That's why Netflix is losing money, ladies and gentlemen. Not because someone is sharing a password with an individual who, let's face it guys, they wouldn't have afforded to buy the service anyway. But we need to blame bad content for Netflix losing money. Overall, while I can play, devil's advocate to the other side of the issue, I stand by the assertion that password sharing isn't the reason that Netflix is not consolidating enough money. Nor is password sharing a bad and condemnable thing in itself, especially because Netflix themselves have publicly endorsed it through their statements and built-in interface model. But as it so happens, the world doesn't revolve around me. It revolves around a diversity of thoughts and opinions. So, that being said, how do you perceive Netflix banning password sharing? Do you think that Netflix is losing money because of password sharing? And, I think more importantly, do you even support password sharing is an idea. Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Here is something about the film industry that you must be acquainted with. It is its own complex miniature realm. But there is always this one singular occasion that, occurs once a year that rattles everyone up and is the movie industry equivalent to Christmas time, which is the Academy Awards time. And it's pretty fascinating because as much as the Academy Awards has been the most prestigious awards ceremony in the industry for decades and allowed good quality films to prosper and get broadcasted to millions of viewers worldwide, therefore increasing revenue for independent films because the audience is like, hey, let's buy this award-winning movie. As much as all of that are upstanding attributes about the Academy Awards, today, 2023, and 2022 last year, and the year before that, the Academy Awards is just infested with social agendas, and most films win due to political considerations and not genuine artistic merit, with all of those reservations about the Oscars aside. In just a few weeks from now, we'll be approaching the 95th Academy Awards ceremony. And I am not gonna lie to you and say that the Academy Awards is going to be a lot of fun, because trust me, the Academy Awards, unless, fingers crossed, we have another Will Smith slapping another guy on stage scenario. Oh! If we don't get that, guys, I know you're going to hate me, but the Academy Awards is going to be the absolute fundamental opposite of a good time. So anyway, in this segment of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, I want to accomplish two things. The first element is going to be going over the Academy Awards nominations of interest. I will be focusing more of my time on the Best Picture and Actor categories. The rest I'll briefly go over, but not in length, mind you. And then, after I do all of that, I am going to put together my final thoughts on the Oscars nominations list. Let's begin with the Best Picture category. All Quiet on the Western Front, Avatar: The Way of Water, The Banshees of Inisherin, Elvis, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I believe to be an exceptional movie on a multitude of levels. The Fabelmans. I like The Fabelmans. Granted, it isn't Steven Spielberg's most caliber work, but you can never say no to Steven Spielberg. A top shelf director of the entire movie industry. Okay, we also got Tar, Top Gun Maverick. I love Top Gun Maverick. It has restored my faith in the movie-going experience, and it serves as a reminder that you do not need social agendas to craft a compelling screenplay narrative. Triangle of Sadness, Women Talking. Let us move on to Best Actress and Actor. Cate Blanchett, Tar, Anna de Armas, Blonde, Michael Williams, The Fablemans, Michelle Yeoh, Everything Everywhere All at Once. For Best Actor, we have Houston Butler, Elvis, Colin Farrell, The Banshees of Inisherin, Brendan Fraser, The Whale, Paul Mescal, Aftersun, and Bill Nighy, Living. Alright, so I haven't watched every single motion picture that's been nominated for Best Acting Performance and Best Picture. But I can't say that I honestly believe that Everything Everywhere All at Once, starring Michelle Yeoh, should consolidate the Best Picture award, because it manages to blend in, a few spices, action spectacle with, of course, an emotionally fueled character drama to boot. Now, you might be asking, well, how about Avatar: The Way of Water, The Fablemans, and Top Gun: Maverick? Don't get me wrong here, ladies and gentlemen. Those movies are on my list of top 5, movies of 2022. And it's absolutely no wonder that they're even nominated for Best Picture to begin with. I think that nomination was well earned. But the thing is, Avatar: The Way of Water has a rather simple plot, which doesn't really allow for groundbreaking storytelling, in my opinion. The Fablemans, as I've already mentioned, isn't Steven Spielberg's most best work compared to, let's say, a number of his 100% perfect films. Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Schindler's List, West Side Story, Ready Player One, and also the Fablemans screenplay is based on Steven Spielberg's own life and early directing career, which means that the story is what it currently is. And you know what? I honestly think that the Fablemans would qualify for winning the acting category. And the reason why I think that the Fablemans should win Best Acting instead of Best Picture is because I honestly believe that it takes some caliber acting to play a character based on a real life existing person. A lot of quality acting. That's why Rami Malek is a very talented actor in Hollywood, in my opinion, because he knew to play the legendary singer of the rock band Queen, Freddie Mercury, in Bohemian Rhapsody. And he did it impeccably. Michelle Williams acting as, Sammy, aka Steven Spielberg's mother, Sammy's mother, in The Fablemans, it's perfect. Like, guys, you need to watch The Fablemans just for her performance alone. It's absolutely perfect in every conceivable way. So, she definitely earned herself the Best Actress nomination. And I hope she gets to take home the trophy for Best Actress as well. Not just a nomination, which was well earned. As for why I think that Everything Everywhere All at Once should get an award instead of Top Gun Maverick, that's because I honestly think that the plot for Top Gun Maverick is less dimensional as opposed to Everything Everywhere All at Once. Because, Top Gun Maverick, revolves around dogfights and not many locations. And before anyone says that I am trashing Top Gun Maverick, I am not saying that the plot for Top Gun Maverick is flat. It isn't flat at all. But what I am simply asserting is that Everything Everywhere All at Once is more complex and original than Top Gun Maverick. All in all, I think that Everything Everywhere All at Once is going to win Best Picture in the Oscars this year. And if it doesn't, I would still be content if, let's say, Top Gun Maverick or The Fabelmans won the trophy instead. But I definitely have more faith in Everything Everywhere All at Once as opposed to the other movies that I've mentioned. What do you think about the upcoming Academy Awards this year? Do you agree with the Oscars nominations list? I haven't gone through all of them, but I encourage you to take a glance and let me know your perceptions on which movie got nominated for X category. Do you concede or do you disagree with me thinking that Everything Everywhere All at Once should consolidate the Best Picture trophy of 2023? Whatever your perceptions and thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Okay, guys, I'm warning you. This is going to sound very bad. Okay, let me take deep breaths. Deep in the 100 box office wood, where Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey plays with $47 million. You know what, guys? I can't do it. I honestly can't. This is, this play of words, it's not going well. So let me just, ditch that. Anyways, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey has earned $47 million from box office ticket sales. You heard that right, ladies and gentlemen. And this data ain't coming from me. This comes to us from Box Office Mojo. Guys, I wish I was joking. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, which was produced on a reported high school production budget of $100,000. Actually, that's a pretty good start-off budget, if you'd ask me. But, whatever. Okay, guys, let me tell you something. I cannot give my personal commentary on Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey because I haven't gotten the chance to avail this movie yet. And, I believe it has just stopped playing in the theaters now. I assume that's what a limited theatrical run means. But you know how theaters are with movies that are in high demand, as we're just hearing with the box office. Maybe they might play it for another weekend or so. But there's no guarantee from me. Now, who knew that a twisted take on a childhood icon and a transfiguration of Winnie the Pooh into this genocidal killer bear would become such a hit? I mean, clearly, Cocaine Bear might become a hit. So, I guess people are really into the prospect of a bear just killing people like a savage. Not to say that Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is a critical hit. For a matter of fact, if you check its Rotten Tomatoes score, it has received a 51% rating for, from the audience. And you know what? While I can see its critical flop, I know that some, if not many of you, are going to despise me for even making the assertion that I'm about to make now. But I perceive the box office success of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey to be well earned. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that this box office triumph is a great learning opportunity for other aspiring filmmakers who want to seize advantage of the free resources accessible at their disposal and utilize an intellectual property from a public domain in order to create an alternative, imaginative, what if story of sorts. Like, what if Winnie the Pooh, who happens to have attachment issues to Christopher Robin, and this results in him being a murderous animal? What happens when you're in this kind of scenario, which is obviously not ideal because Christopher Robin is probably gonna die in this movie, or maybe he'll make it out of it alive and someone else is gonna die. Whatever, guys. Bloodshed is pretty much self-explanatory with the title Blood and Honey in it. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Guys, I myself have yet to watch the movie, so perhaps when it comes out on digital, I guess. I mean, who knows? Okay. So, the question is for you guys. What do you think about these box office figures for Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey? Are you like me and are rather impressed with this box office victory? Or do you perhaps think that the notion of Winnie the Pooh being a dark serial killer is unsuccessful or off-putting, or both? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom Show, where we had a lot of fun critiquing movies. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, as you just heard in the first half of the show, but nonetheless, I still had a lot of immense joy doing this podcast. So, make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the 31st installment of the Cinema Courtroom. I hope to see you guys again in the next and 32nd episode of the Cinema Courtroom Show, which launches on Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, and many more to come. Thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your galactic judge, Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular day. And remember, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania sucks.
Hello there.
Court is now dismissed.